Thank you very much, Eleanor, and thank you to the AR and AJ. We're really, really thrilled to have this award, and it means an awful lot to us, so thank you very much. We are just going to introduce ourselves briefly and then do a very quick talk, just about the project itself and also about what Part W are working on. My name's Alice Brownfield. I'm a co-director of Part W and chair. And this is Zoe Berman, who is also co-director and founder of Part W. So we're just going to take you through a couple of things that we've been working on and hope that it sounds of interest to you guys and we can get you on board as well. One of the main things about this award for us is that it extends our work beyond the kind of current reach we have, and we really want to extend the conversation about gender equity as far as possible and involve people who might not normally be involved in that conversation. Okay, so this is Part W. This is our map, a sneak preview of our map, Women's Work London, which we're going to tell you a bit more about. First, Zoe's going to tell you a little bit more about the genesis of Part W and how it came into being.
As Alice said, my name's Zoe Berman. I'm the founder of the organisation. We're an action group that campaigns for gender equity. And really things kind of came about in my mind in sort of 2016, 2017, when possibly like many of you, I felt that there was this real kind of pulling backwards in the attack on global civil rights and the impact that was having on women and people of diverse genders. And so I started to mooch the idea of maybe having some sort of discussion group. I'd gone along to the first of the women's marches. Some of you might have been there, and I was tremendously inspired by this moment of voices coming together and sharing and speaking out. And I went along to off the back of that, the next day, straight after having been on that march, I went and paid my subs to the Women's Equality Party. And going along to some of the local branch meetings for that, I started to become more aware of the data around the way in which austerity was impacting particularly on women. For example, the way in which a woman needs 12 times of her salary to be able to buy a house, whilst for men that's 8 times. When we look, for example, just thinking about housing, when we look at the data around people who are homeless, we think often of rough sleepers who are primarily men, but actually people who are displaced and who are moving around from place to place, sometimes having experienced domestic violence. It's actually primarily women who are affected by that. So this kind of data, I was seeing this with kind of an architect's lens and thinking, well, what kind of contribution could I make? I didn't know the answer to that, and so my instinct was very much to talk to others. These are just some of the many women who have been part of the discussions that Part W have had since we were founded in 2018. Brilliant people who across engineering, architecture, placemaking, planning have come together to have discussions, and out of that to come up with some solutions, some campaigns. Now, this is a kind of the optics of what's happening. A lot of you will be familiar with this image. This is a photograph which on the bottom is the photograph which was promoted for that TV series. The top is the real photograph. It's an extraordinary use of Photoshop and a representation of the way in which women are literally, in this case, being airbrushed out of the story. When you look at resources and places where you might find information about architects consistently again and again and built into data, built into information, is this sort of optic where famous architects, it's always that women's appearance is limited. And so that is then, for many of you who are familiar with the RIBA, when you walk in, on the left-hand side behind the reception desk, that inequality is carved into that wall with the RIBA Gold Medal, which was an example that we looked at. When we came together as a group, we were talking about representation and recognition, and the Royal Institute of British Architects Gold Medal is an example of, and when we started our first meetings, we came to this piece of data, which the RIBA Gold Medal is an example. It is the case also in the Pritzker Prize, many of these international awards, where women's contribution is not acknowledged and not granted recognition equally to men. So this is our first campaign that we did back in 2019, this point about recognition of granting appreciation and value of women's work. This is when we started, we were doing this, as I say, in 2018. And our first campaign was 2019. This is the RIBA Gold Medal. These are the women who have been granted that accolade. This, at the time, was the only woman who in her own right had been given that recognition. And so it's a simple piece of data. It's not complex data, it's not complex research. But what we would try to do was to shine a light on this and to spotlight what's going on. So our first campaign was really very simple. We took to social media. We invited people to take a piece of paper to write the name of a woman who through history has been overlooked, and to share their suggestion of women who've done amazing work through history and who are worthy of recognition and appreciation. We also, at that time, were encouraging people to make nominations, because we won't make change if we don't participate in making that change. So we at that time, we were calling out for people to make nominations for the medals, to submit these nominations, to be actively part of that. These are just some of the nominations that we knew were being put forward, so that there couldn't be an excuse of, oh, well, no women were put forward that year. We knew that they were, and we were part of calling for other people to participate in that. And so it's been absolutely fantastic that subsequently there has been this change. We were delighted that Grafton were, after the next year, Grafton were jointly awarded that medal, the only practice who has also then asked that award be given for their practice rather than their individual names, which also is a moment of change. Leslie Loco, fantastically, was then given the Annie Spink. And also within all this discussion, of course, in saying that not only had there been this limitation around the women who had been granted the medal, with the RIBA medal as an example, no person who is black had ever been given the award. So this fantastic moment of change then, when David Adjaye was given the award. So looking at, in terms of our research, this feeds in also to the sources of information, the reading lists, the examples, the precedents that students are taught within universities, within schools of architecture. Consistently, there's this male domination within those examples that a next generation of architects are being given. And that pops up on archival material within maps, where, whilst there are digital maps which are doing amazing things, promoting work by many people, there is still much scope to update and to make change to for women and trans and non-binary people to be featured in these resources and to offer inspiration to a next generation. And so it is sometimes we're challenged that people say what we're doing is contentious. We would say that we're pointing out facts, we're pointing out data, and then from there trying to create additional and further parallel sources that can be hopefully inspiring and add to the debate and create more role models. So Alice is going to tell you a little bit more about our mapping project.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. So this is a continuation of our work, which is thinking about recognition and the way in which certain sectors of our professions are overlooked. Another strand of our work is actually thinking about gender equity within design as well. But what we're focusing on today is talking about gender equity in the professions. Women's Work London is our latest project. This is an example of a sort of tester map that we produced, a very small scale map that we produced in 2021 for the exhibition called How We Live Now, which was an exhibition about Matrix feminist design collectives' work. And Women's Work London is the idea that we remap and we think about how we celebrate women's contributions to cities around us. So Women's Work is a project which we've now expanded on since then. I just click opposite. And on International Women's Day last year, so the 8th of March last year, we launched a call for crowdsourcing for suggestions for diverse and intersectional projects and practitioners who self-identify as women for where they've built or had a pivotal role in the coming about of a building. And we launched this for the whole of the UK initially. We had over 150 suggestions for central London, and we thought that's a good place to start. And one of the things we hope to do as a next step, funding dependent or resource dependent, after we've had a little bit of a lie down, is thinking about extending it beyond London. But we're here today to talk about this current project, and here you'll see just some of the crowdsourced suggestions that we had. These could be projects where a woman or a woman have played a pivotal role in its design, perhaps in its planning, perhaps in its conservation, in its commissioning or its construction. And the roles could be really diverse. One of the things we wanted to celebrate was the real kind of diverse ecology of roles and collaboration that it takes to bring a building together, and really undercut that notion as a kind of single author of projects, and how we start to celebrate how spaces come into being. So these roles could be women working as designers, as architects, as planners, as engineers, as policymakers, as community action groups, as campaigners, as clients, and as conservationists, ecologists, for example. So as I said, we had over 150 suggestions. Here's just a few, real variety of projects. And then in September, we drew 4 independent judges together, Laura Mark, Stephanie Edwards, Adam Nathaniel Furman, and Deborah Broomfield, who came. And we had a really interesting afternoon discussing some of these projects and trying to whittle it down to 30, which will be on our first printed map. And here you go, here's a sneak preview. This is launching next week on International Women's Day this year. So this is launching on the 8th of March. Here's our sort of more detailed printed map. And we've learned quite a lot doing this project. We've learned that it's really hard to write about projects recognising the collaboration that goes into them. It's really easy to say this architect delivered this project, but of course an architect doesn't deliver a project on their own. And so it's sort of understanding, finding new languages to explain the different roles and the importance of those, celebrating sort of what different types of leadership look like. But also we've thought a lot about feminist mapping. We base a lot of maps around roads, around transport. What happens if we base maps around public spaces, around parks, around rivers? And so we've done a lot of thinking about that too. And we've also sort of got to a point halfway through the project where we realised we were just mapping built projects. And there's so many people in this room who are so fundamental to things that can't so easily tangibly be mapped. So people working in policy and planning, environmental change, people like Nikki Gavron, for example, founding C40 Cities, or Jeanette Arnold making London transport more accessible. So we've started to introduce that to the map now, and that's also represented here. Some examples include Waterloo Bridge, which was built predominantly by women, which is amazing how many times we go across that bridge in a year. Don't know how many people knew that already, hopefully a lot of you. There are other projects where it's been fantastic to kind of understand the different and varying roles of women that have played. So there's a project called Botimer Walk, which is a project designed by Anne Thorne Architects, which is a highly sustainable social housing project. And it's named Botimer Walk after Dora Botimer, who was a local housing activist and campaigner. She campaigned for that estate to be regenerated with a community-led approach. She sadly died very, very early in her life, but it's named after her. And so these stories of kind of interwoven collaboration and contributions coming together, and that's what we're trying to celebrate. It's now for sale. Fortunately, our event next week has now just sold out this morning. But we'd love for you guys to come and buy a map and to celebrate it and share it or tell people about it. In the future, we hope that we'll have enough resource to make this a digital, a proper digital resource. The crowdsource list is still available online if you want to go and have a look at it. It's publicly accessible. Obviously, this map is much more curated and looks at the detail of these projects in greater detail. So we're coming to the end. And all that remains really is for us to say a huge thank you to the AR and the AJ for these awards. We think it's fantastic. We're so humbled to be in this room with such amazing women. It's really daunting, sat there after lunch, seeing all these sort of amazing people come up on stage and hearing these conversations that are happening. We're a team that is much more than Zoe and I, and sadly not everyone could be here today, but we're sort of representing on behalf of them. Is there anything else left to say?
No, we're in the middle of this project and just coming to the end, and so of the mapping project. And so, as Alice has said, it's been absolutely amazing to be given this accolade already. And we hope that the work that we've just started with this map will continue. Thank you very, very much for this moment to celebrate that.
I guess the only other thing, sorry, just to say, I just remembered, is that we really hope this map will serve kind of lots of different purposes. So we really love it to be in practices, we'd love it to be in educational settings. We really, as part of our sort of funding model and the donations that we've received, we've built into that outreach with local schools who need the resources most. So we're hoping that young people see this map and start to sort of understand the various different roles you can play in shaping the built environment. But we also hope it starts conversations about who is involved and who's excluded from the production of built space around us, and ultimately contributing to a more equitable city. So, yeah, thank you very much.